The message came at 3 in the morning, not because it was urgent, but because the Galactic Convergence Council did not care what time it was on Earth. They never did. Secretary General Nari sat at her desk in Seoul and read it twice. The words were polite. They always were. The council had a way of wrapping bad news in careful, formal language, the kind that made you feel foolish for being angry about it. But the meaning was clear enough. Earth had 20 standard days to respond to the terms of the ultimatum, or the council would begin what they called enforcement proceedings. Enforcement proceedings. That was their phrase for it. It meant blockade. It meant warships sitting at the edge of human space, not firing, just watching, making sure nothing moved in or out without permission. It meant cutting off trade routes that Earth had spent 15 years carefully building. It meant isolation, slow, deliberate, and completely legal under convergence law. And if Earth refused that too, well, the document did not say, it did not have to. Nari set the paper down and looked out the window at the city below. It was quiet. Most of the lights were still off. Billions of people sleeping, not knowing that somewhere in deep space, a room full of alien officials had decided that 3 of Earth's outer star systems, systems that humans had mapped, surveyed, and built stations in over the last decade, now belonged to someone else. She called a meeting for 6 in the morning. By 7, the room was already loud. The military commanders wanted to respond with strength. Admiral Tiang, broad across the shoulders and calm in the way that only people who had spent 30 years in uniform ever were, said Earth's 3rd Deep Space Fleet was ready to move. They had the ships. They had the positions. They could make it clear, quickly and without any room for misunderstanding, that humanity was not handing over anything. The politicians were less sure. Minister Dihun spread his hands across the table and talked about proportionality, about how Earth was still young in the galactic community, barely 40 years into faster-than-light travel, about how 17 civilizations acting together would be something no human fleet had ever faced. He was not wrong, and everyone in the room understood that, and nobody wanted to be the one to say it out loud. The argument went in circles for 2 hours. Voices rose and fell. People drew things on screens and then erased them. Coffee cups were refilled. Nothing was decided. Nari listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not write anything down. She sat at the head of the table with her hands flat on the surface and she listened. And when the room finally ran out of new things to say, she stood up. "We are sending a diplomat," she said. The room went quiet in a different way. "1 person," she continued. "No fleet escort past the outer boundary, no military presence on the station. We go in through the front door, we stand in their room, and we talk." Minister Dihun looked at her as though she had spoken in a language he did not recognize. Admiral Tiang said nothing, but something changed in his expression, not surprise, exactly. More like a man who had just seen something confirmed that he had suspected for a long time. "Who?" someone asked from the far end of the table. Nari did not hesitate. "Junho." Junho was not a famous man. That was, in certain ways, the whole point of him. He did not appear in news broadcasts. He had never given a public speech. He had no book, no profile, no documentary. He had spent 19 years moving quietly through rooms that most people never knew existed, having conversations that were never recorded, fixing problems that were never officially named as problems. He was 44 years old, medium height, medium build, with the kind of face that people forgot about 10 minutes after meeting him. His hair was short, his clothes were plain, and he carried himself the way very still water does, calm on the surface, and you could not tell how deep it went just by looking. When he smiled, it reached his eyes. When he did not smile, his face gave away nothing at all. He was in his apartment when Nari called. He was making tea. He listened to the full briefing without asking a single question. When she finished, there was a short silence on the line. "When do I leave?" he said. 4 days. "I'll need Yuna." Already arranged. And Woojin. He is already packing. A brief pause. Anything else? Nari asked. No, Junho said simply. I will bring my own tea. Harry found out she was going 2 days before departure. She was 28 years old, 3 years into her career in the diplomatic corps, and she had been assigned to Junho's team as junior staff, which meant she would observe, carry documents, manage secure communications, and stay out of the way unless told otherwise. She had read about him. Everyone in the corps had, eventually. But reading about Junho and standing 3 feet away from him were, she was quickly discovering, 2 very different experiences. He was quiet in a way that felt chosen. Not shy, not distant, just very, very still. Like someone who had learned a long time ago that silence was a more useful tool than noise, and had spent years getting good at using it. He moved through spaces without drawing attention. He listened more than he spoke. And when he did speak, the words were short and exact, with nothing extra added. Yuna was different in almost every way, quick and sharp, always reading something on her tablet, always 2 steps ahead of whatever was happening. She had been Junho's senior aide for 11 years. She finished his sentences sometimes, not because she was guessing, but because she already knew. The 2 of them communicated in half-phrases and small looks that Harry could not fully follow yet, and probably would not for a long time. Woojin was a large, quiet man with steady eyes. He stood near doors. He watched people. He said very little and appeared to forget nothing. The 4 of them boarded the diplomatic shuttle on a gray morning, with a small group of officials watching from the platform below. There were no speeches, no send-off ceremony. Nari stood at the edge of the platform with her hands behind her back and watched them board, her expression unreadable. As the shuttle lifted and the ground fell away beneath them, Harry looked back through the small window at the figures growing smaller on the platform, and felt, for the first time, the full size of what was happening. She turned and looked at Junho. He was already reading, a physical printed document resting on his knee, a cup of tea cooling on the armrest beside him. He turned a page. He did not look up. Sir, Harry said quietly, what are your orders? Junho turned another page. I do not have orders, he said. She waited for something more. It did not come. Back on the platform, one of the junior officials turned to Nari as the shuttle disappeared into the clouds. What exactly did you tell him to do? The man asked. Nari watched the sky a moment longer, the gray closing back over the spot where the shuttle had been. I told him the situation, she said. That is enough. The official frowned, and if something goes wrong. Nari turned away from the sky and walked back toward the building. It will not, she said. And the thing about Nari, the particular quality that had put her in the position she was in, was that, when she said something in that quiet, flat, certain voice, it was very hard not to believe her. Somewhere in deep space, a station the size of a small city hung between 3 suns. Inside it, 17 civilizations sat in a grand chamber and waited for the humans to arrive. They were expecting a negotiation. They did not know what was coming. Veridian Station was built to make you feel small. That was not an accident. The civilization that designed it, the Veth, the oldest and most powerful member of the Galactic Convergence Council, had spent centuries perfecting the art of architecture as pressure. Every corridor was slightly too wide. Every ceiling was slightly too high. The lights were cold and white and came from everywhere at once, so there were no shadows and nowhere to hide your expression. The floors were polished to a mirror finish, so when you walked, you could see yourself beneath your own feet, small, reflected, moving through a space that did not belong to you. Most diplomats felt it the moment they stepped off their shuttle, a tightening in the chest, a shrinking of the shoulders, a sudden awareness of how far from home they were. Junho stepped off the shuttle and looked around the docking bay the way a man looks around a room he is deciding whether to buy. Calm, unhurried, mildly interested. Yuna was already reading her tablet. Wujin looked at the ceiling, the walls, the guards stationed at the far doors, not threateningly, just cataloging, the way he always did when he entered a new space. Harry stayed close and tried not to look as wide-eyed as she felt. A Veth protocol officer met them at the bay entrance. It was tall and thin, with gray-silver skin that looked faintly like polished stone, and it moved with the slow, deliberate grace of something that had never in its life been in a hurry. It welcomed the human delegation to Viridian Station in a voice that carried exactly the right amount of warmth, enough to be polite, not enough to mean anything. It explained the schedule. The council session would begin in 2 hours. The human delegation would be escorted to a waiting area where they could refresh themselves and review the formal terms of the proceeding. It explained the protocol for entering the council chamber, the path the delegation would walk, where they would stand, the order in which they would be permitted to speak. Junho listened with his hands in his pockets. When the officer finished, he nodded once. "Thank you," he said pleasantly. "We will find our own way." The officer paused. "I must insist on providing escort. Protocol requires." "We have the station layout," Yuna said without looking up from her tablet. "We are fine." There was a brief silence. The officer looked at them both. Then it stepped aside. They found a small room off the main corridor and sat in it for the next 2 hours. Junho drank tea. Yuna read and occasionally said things to Junho in a low voice, and he would nod or say one word back. Wujin stood near the door. Harry sat with her hands in her lap and watched all of them and wondered how any of them were this calm. At one point she asked Yuna what the plan was. Yuna looked up from her tablet. "Walk in, stand there, talk." Harry waited, and then we see. Harry decided to stop asking questions. The council chamber was at the center of the station, which was, again, not an accident. Everything on Viridian was arranged so that the chamber was what you moved toward, every corridor angled slightly inward, every directional sign pointing to the middle. The message was architectural and constant. This is where things are decided. This is where power lives. The chamber itself was enormous. The ceiling disappeared into a darkness high above, and from that darkness hung long, thin lights that fell like cold rain frozen in place. The walls curved inward in a wide arc, and along the top of that arc sat the grand tier, a raised semicircular platform of 17 seats, each one elevated above the floor by several meters, each one occupied by the senior representative of a council civilization. The floor below was open and bare. At the center of that floor was a small marked circle, a faint ring etched into the stone. That was where junior delegations stood. That was where they were expected to present themselves, looking up at the grand tier above them, heads slightly tilted, voices carrying upward. Every species that had ever entered this room had stood in that circle. It was just what you did. There were other delegations already present, seated in tiered observer rows along the sides of the chamber, representatives from smaller civilizations, advisors, and staff. They watched the human delegation enter. There were quiet sounds, movements, the particular quality of attention that comes when something slightly unexpected is happening. Junho walked in and looked at the circle on the floor. He kept walking. He walked past it without slowing, without glancing at it again, without any gesture that suggested he had made a decision. He walked to the center of the open floor, a point equidistant from every side of the chamber, and he stopped. He set his briefcase down beside his right foot. He looked up at the grand tier. He did not bow. The chamber noise grew for a moment, and then died into a heavy silence. Even the Veth protocol officers near the doors went still. Harry, positioned behind and to the left of Junho as she had been instructed, felt every set of eyes in the room move across the floor and land on the small, plain-looking human standing in the wrong place with his hands loose at his sides. At the center of the grand tier sat the Veth Primarch. It was ancient. No one outside the Veth knew exactly how old, and its gray skin had gone almost white with age, and its eyes were pale and cold, and had seen the rise and fall of civilizations that humans had never heard of. It looked down at Junho the way a cliff looks at the sea, unmoved, patient, certain of its own permanence. It spoke. Its voice moved through a translation system and arrived in Junho's ear smooth and clear and utterly without warmth. The human delegation will take its designated position. Junho looked up at it. His face was completely neutral. "I am fine here," he said. The words were quiet. They were not rude. There was no challenge in his voice, no heat, no defiance. He said it the way you say something that is simply and obviously true, the way you might say the floor is flat or the room is large. He said it and then he waited, without shifting his weight or breaking eye contact. The Primarch was still for a moment. "This is a formal proceeding of the Galactic Convergence Council," it said. "Protocol is not optional." "I understand," Junho said. "I am ready to begin when you are." He said nothing else. He did not move. He stood there in the center of the empty floor like a stone that had been there forever and was not planning on going anywhere. From the observer rows, something rippled through the watching delegations. Not quite noise. More like the feeling before noise, the collective intake of breath that happens when something occurs that has no precedent, and no one is quite sure yet what it means. Harry, standing still behind him, felt it land in her chest like a struck bell. She realized in that moment that she had just watched something that would be talked about for a long time. She could not have explained why she was so certain. She just was. Junho reached down, opened his briefcase, and removed a single sheet of paper. He placed it on the floor in front of him, face down. Then he straightened up and looked at the Primarch again, calm and unhurried and completely still. "Whenever you are ready," he said. In the high seat above, the Veth Primarch looked down at the human standing in the wrong place, on the wrong part of the floor, holding nothing, threatening nothing, with a piece of paper lying at his feet. And for the first time in longer than most civilizations had existed, it did not immediately know what to do. And that, Junho knew, was exactly where he needed them to be. The Veth Primarch recovered quickly. That was the thing about ancient things. They bent before they broke, and they had learned long ago not to let surprise show on their face for more than a moment. It straightened in its high seat and folded its long pale hands together and looked down at Junho with the calm, heavy patience of something that had outlasted empires. "Very well," it said. "The Council acknowledges the presence of the human delegation." There was just enough pause before the word delegation to make it feel like a courtesy being extended, rather than a fact being stated. Earth has been summoned to respond to the terms issued under Convergence Law, Article 9. 3 star systems, designated outer human territories 7, 11, and 14, are to be transferred to Council-managed jurisdiction within 60 standard days. This is not a proposal. The terms are final. Earth's response is expected to be a confirmation of compliance. It stopped there. The chamber was very quiet. The Primarch was not asking a question. It was telling Junho how the next few minutes were going to go. It had done this before many times, and it always went the same way. The junior civilization's representative would say something about hardship, about how important the systems were to their people, about what alternatives might be considered. The Council would listen with polite patience. Small adjustments would be offered. Agreements would be signed. The junior civilization would leave having lost everything they came in with, but feeling, somehow, that they had been treated fairly. It was a very old process. It worked extremely well. Junho let the silence sit for a moment after the Primarch finished. Then he said, "Before I respond, I want to go through something with the Council. I will not take long." The Primarch gestured, a small, slow movement that meant proceed, the way you tell a child to finish what they are saying so the adults can get back to talking. Junho reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small, flat device. He held it up without asking. And the chamber's own projection system, which was not supposed to respond to external devices, responded. A quiet ripple of surprise moved through the observer rows. Yuna had spent 6 weeks building the interface that made that possible. She did not look proud of it. She just watched. A list appeared in the air above the chamber floor, large and clear and readable from every seat in the room. These are the 11 previous cases, Junho said, in which Article 9 was used to reallocate resource systems from smaller civilizations to council-managed jurisdiction. He let people read it. He waited. He was very good at waiting. In the first case, he continued, the Pelhari Compact lost 2 mining systems in their northern territory. They were told the reallocation was temporary. That was 63 years ago. The systems were never returned. He moved to the next item. In the second case, the Sorrel Federation lost 3 atmospheric processing stations. Within 8 years of the transfer, their domestic energy production had dropped by 40%. They are currently a debtor state to 2 council-member civilizations. He moved again. Third case, the Muven people, 4 systems. They no longer exist as an independent civilization. He went through all 11. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He read each case the way a doctor reads a chart, clearly, without emotion, because the facts did not need his feelings to be devastating. They were devastating on their own. By the fourth case, the chamber was completely silent. Not the polite silence of people waiting for their turn to speak. The silence of people who are sitting very still because something uncomfortable is happening and moving might draw attention. By the 7th case, 2 of the smaller civilizations in the observer rows had stopped looking at Junho and started looking at each other. When he finished, Junho let the list hang in the air a moment longer. Then he closed it. I want to be clear, he said. I am not accusing the council of anything. I am simply reading the record. The record belongs to the council. These are your own documents. He paused. Sealed documents, yes, but documents nonetheless. The Primarch's pale eyes had not moved from Junho's face. How did you obtain sealed council records? The same way anyone obtains anything, Junho said simply. We paid attention for a long time. A delegate near the far end of the Grand Tier, the representative of a civilization called the Van Dominion, large and rust-colored, and usually very loud in council session, said nothing. It had gone very still. Its own civilization was on that list. Case 5. It had not known until this moment that anyone outside the council's inner circle had access to the details of what had happened to its outer systems 40 years ago. Its stillness was the stillness of something recalculating. Junho did not look at it. He already knew it was there. He had known before he walked in. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second device. The projection changed. What appeared now was not a list but a map, a wide, 3-dimensional display of deep space, with colored markers showing fleet positions across several sectors. This is Earth's current military posture, Junho said. Someone in the observer rows made a sound. It was quickly suppressed. The map showed humanity's deep space fleet distribution, not in full detail, not with specifications or weapon loadouts, but in positions, numbers, coverage arcs, and one specific cluster of markers sitting at the edge of a particular sector, 11 minutes outside Veridian Station's own defensive range, that had not been there a week ago. Admiral Tiang commands that fleet, Junho said. He is there because I asked him to be, not to threaten anyone. He is simply available in the area in case he is needed. He looked up at the Grand Tier. He will not be needed, but he is there. He let that sit. I want to tell you something about humans, Junho said then. His voice had not changed, still even, still quiet. But something in it had shifted, a weight that had not been there before, or perhaps had always been there and was only now fully visible. Most species in this room came from worlds that were, in the broad sense, manageable. Your predators could be outrun or outwitted. Your weather was difficult but survivable. Your environments, over time, became places you could live in with reasonable effort. He paused. Earth tried to kill us every single day for 4 billion years, not a figure of speech. From the first living thing that appeared in the ocean, everything around it was trying to consume it. That pressure never stopped. It just changed shape. By the time humans stood upright, we had already survived mass extinctions, ice ages, plagues, and the constant company of creatures that were faster and stronger and better armed than we were. He looked around the chamber slowly, taking in every face, every set of eyes. We survived all of it, not because we are the strongest, because we are the most prepared, because we do not forget, because we plan for the worst and then we plan for what comes after the worst, and then we plan for what comes after that. The room was perfectly still. You looked at Earth, Junho continued, and you saw a young civilization, 40 years in space, small history, limited reach. You thought manageable, you thought they will argue, they will worry, and then they will sign. He said it without contempt, simply as an observation. We understand why you thought that. It is a reasonable conclusion. It is also wrong. He looked up at the Primarch. We have 7 billion people on Earth, he said. Every single one of them has read history, human history, which is, without exaggeration, a long, continuous story of what happens when someone tries to take something from us. He let a beat pass. It does not end well for the someone. The Primarch spoke. Its voice was still controlled, but there was something new at the edges of it, not fear, not yet, but the careful quality of a very intelligent thing that is updating its understanding of a situation in real time. This begins to sound like a threat, human. Junho shook his head once. No, he said, a threat is an offer. I am giving you information. There is a difference. He bent down and picked up the sheet of paper from the floor. He held it at his side without showing it. A threat says, do this or we will do that. What I am saying is simply, here is what we are. Here is what we have always been. And here is why the question of these 3 star systems has only one answer, and the answer is not the one you wrote in your document. He stopped talking. The chamber held its silence like something fragile. From the observer rows, Harry watched him stand there in the center of the floor, small against the vast dark of the chamber, plain, completely still. And she thought about the 4 billion years he had just described. She thought about everything that had lived and died and fought and clawed its way forward so that humans could eventually stand upright and walk out into space. She thought about all of it converging, somehow, into this one quiet man standing in the wrong spot on the floor of an alien council chamber, holding a piece of paper, taking the entire room apart without raising his voice once. She had stopped holding her breath at some point. She could not remember when. Above them all, the Veth Primarch sat in its ancient seat and looked down at Junho, and for the first time in a very long time, it called for a recess. The recess lasted 40 minutes. Junho spent it on the chamber floor. He did not go to a private room. He did not ask for refreshments or a chair or any of the things that visiting delegations were usually offered during breaks. He simply stayed where he was, in the center of the open floor, and ate a protein bar from his jacket pocket and read through a small stack of documents that Yuna handed him without a word. Yuna sat cross-legged on the floor beside him, her tablet in her lap, her eyes moving fast across whatever she was reading. She had been receiving quiet transmissions since the session paused, careful, unsigned messages routed through secondary channels, all coming from the same general direction. The observer rose. She did not tell Junho about them yet. She finished reading each one first, sorted them, and then said 5 words to him in a low voice. Junho nodded. He turned a page. Wujin stood near the main chamber doors. He had not sat down since they arrived. He watched the room the way water watches a crack in a dam, patiently, completely, missing nothing. 2 Veth security officers stood on the far side of the doors, and looked at him occasionally with the particular discomfort of people who are used to being the most watchful ones in a room, and have just encountered someone better at it. Harry stood a few steps behind Junho and tried to look like she was doing something purposeful. She was not. She was watching the observer rows. The smaller delegations were talking among themselves. Not loudly, nothing on Viridian was ever loud. The station's design discouraged it, but with an energy that had not been there before the session started. Heads were close together. Hands moved. Eyes moved to Junho and then away and then back. The representative from the Sorvan Collective, a small, pale civilization with large, dark eyes and very careful manners, had turned fully in its seat and was looking at the human delegation with an expression that Harry could not quite read, but that felt, somehow, like recognition. She thought about what Junho had said, about the 11 cases, about the Muven people who no longer existed as an independent civilization. She thought about how many of the civilizations sitting in those observer rows had their own cases, their own systems, their own signed agreements that had cost them more than the documents said. The chamber was quiet, but something had shifted inside it. A change in pressure, slow and significant, the way weather changes before a storm. When the council returned to the Grand Tier, they were not the same as when they had left. They were composed, the Veth Primarch especially, which had the practiced stillness of something that had governed for centuries and knew how to wear its face. But underneath the composure there was a new quality, something tighter and more careful. The easy weight of authority had changed into something that was working harder to hold its shape. The Primarch spoke first, as it always did. The Council has considered the points raised during the first portion of this session, it said. In acknowledgement of Earth's position and in the spirit of convergence cooperation, a revised proposal is being offered. It laid out the revision with the smooth efficiency of long practice. Instead of 3 star systems, Earth would transfer 1. Only the smallest of the 3 outer human territory 7, the least developed, the one with the lowest current output. A single system, not 3. The Council framed this as a significant concession, a gesture of goodwill, an example of the flexibility and fairness that made the convergence what it was. The Primarch finished and folded its hands and waited. The chamber waited. Harry found herself leaning forward slightly without meaning to. 1 system instead of 3 was objectively, mathematically, a better outcome. There were people back on Earth, serious and experienced people who would have signed that agreement and called it a victory. She felt the pull of it even now, standing here, knowing what she knew. The desire for it to be enough. The desire for the room to relax. She looked at Junho. He had not moved. His face had not changed. He was looking up at the Primarch with the same expression he had worn since he walked in, open, neutral, giving away nothing. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he crouched down to the floor. He picked up the sheet of paper that had been lying face down since the beginning of the session. He turned it over and looked at it. Whatever was written on it, he had already read many times. His eyes moved over it quickly, not reading, just confirming. Then he stood back up. He held the paper out toward the Grand Tier, horizontal, at arm's length, the way you hold something you are about to release. Then he turned it flat and let it fall. It drifted down to the floor slowly, turning once in the still air of the chamber and landed face up. He pushed it forward across the floor with his foot, a slow, even slide, until it stopped roughly in the direction of the Grand Tier's base. That is Earth's response to the revised proposal, he said. 2 of the Veth protocol officers moved to retrieve the document. One of them picked it up, read it, and brought it to the Primarch. The Primarch looked at it. On the paper in plain printed text was 1 line. The answer is no. This is the only answer there will be. Office of the Human Diplomatic Corps, Earth. The chamber did not erupt. It did not need to. The silence that came after was louder than an eruption. It was the silence of 17 civilizations recalculating at the same time, and the sound of that recalculation, though it made no actual noise, filled every corner of the room. The Primarch set the paper down with great care, the way you set down something you are not sure how to hold. "You are refusing a direct concession from the Galactic Convergence Council," it said. "Yes," Junho said. "You understand the consequences of that refusal." "I understand what you believe the consequences would be," Junho said. "Before today." A beat. "Things are different now," he continued. "Not because we made them different, they were always this way. You simply did not have all the information." He looked around the grand tier, taking in every face, not with hostility, but with the steady attention of someone making sure they are understood. "You have it now. That changes what your options actually are, as opposed to what you believed they were when you wrote the ultimatum." The Van Dominion delegate, who had been silent since Case 5 appeared on the projection, spoke for the first time. Its voice was lower than usual. "What exactly are you saying, human?" Junho looked at it directly. He had been waiting for someone from the Observer Rose to speak, not the Primarch, someone else. It mattered who asked the question. "I am saying," Junho said carefully, "that the Council issued an ultimatum based on a model of what Earth is. That model was incomplete. You believed we were a young civilization, uncertain of ourselves, grateful for our seat at this table, unlikely to push back in any meaningful way." He paused. "We are young, we are grateful for nothing, and we have been pushing back against things that wanted to destroy us since before we had language." He turned slightly, so that his words could reach the full arc of the Observer Rose. "We do not want conflict. We have never wanted conflict. What we want is very simple. We want to be left alone. We want our systems, which we found and mapped and built on with our own labor, to remain ours. We want to sit at this table as members, not as a problem to be managed." He stopped. "That is not a negotiation. That is a statement of fact about what is going to happen." He looked back at the Primarch. "We are not the Pelhari Compact," he said quietly. "We are not the Sorrel Federation. We are not the Muven. We studied all of them. We learned from all of them. We have been watching this council for 15 years, and we know exactly how every one of those 11 cases went, and we made very sure, long before today, that we would never be Case 12. The Primarch looked at him for a long time. "This is not how things are done," it said. There was something in its voice that might, in another creature, have been frustration. In the Primarch, it was more like the sound of a gear that had been running smoothly for a very long time, and had just encountered something it could not turn. "I know," Junho said. He almost sounded sympathetic. "I imagine that is difficult. We are sorry for the difficulty." He did not sound particularly sorry. He sounded honest, which was different. But the way things are done was designed for a specific outcome. That outcome is not available today. He reached down and picked up his briefcase. "We are not leaving this station," he said. "We are not closing diplomatic channels. We are not declaring anything. Earth's seat at this table stays exactly where it is." He held the Primarch's gaze one last time. "But those 3 systems, all 3, not 1, not 2, stay ours. That is the end of this topic. If the Council would like to move to any other matter of convergence business, we are happy to participate." He said it the way you close a door, not with a slam, just a firm final click. From the Observer Rose, the Sorvan representative watched the human diplomat stand in the center of the floor with his briefcase at his side, and the Veth Primarch above him going very still in its ancient seat. And it thought, with something close to wonder, that in 60 years of attending council sessions, it had never once seen the Primarch go still like that. It had seen it angry. It had seen it cold. It had seen it exercise the full, terrible patience of a thing that simply waits for smaller things to run out of options. It had never seen it stopped. Harry, standing behind Junho, felt the shift move through the chamber like a change in temperature, not the sharp heat of a confrontation, something quieter than that. The specific feeling of a room full of powerful things updating their understanding of the world and not entirely liking what the update contained. She looked at Junho's back straight, still, completely relaxed, and thought about what Nari had said before they left. It will not go wrong. She was beginning to understand why Nari had been so sure. The council did not formally close the session. It simply stopped. The Primarch sat in its high seat for a long moment after Junho's last words, and then it rose, and the other 16 members of the Grand Tier rose with it, and they filed out through the doors behind the platform without a word. No closing statement. No scheduled date for the next session. No formal acknowledgement of what had just happened. They simply left. The chamber emptied slowly after that. The observer delegations filtered out in ones and twos, quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are saving their words for somewhere more private. A few of them looked at Junho on their way out. Most did not. The ones who did look had different things in their eyes, some unreadable, some carefully blank, and one or two carrying something that might have been relief, though it was the cautious kind, the kind that does not let itself be seen too clearly yet. The Sorvan representative was the last to leave. The observer rose. It paused at the edge of the floor and looked at Junho for just a moment, not long enough to be a conversation, long enough to be something. Then it walked out. Junho watched it go. Then he picked up his briefcase and the four of them walked back to the docking bay and boarded the shuttle and left Viridian Station the same way they had arrived, quietly, without ceremony, without looking back. Nobody fired a shot. That was the thing that people would talk about later when the story eventually came out, and it did come out slowly in pieces, through the careful leaks that Yuna managed over the following months, each piece landing in the right place at the right time. Nobody fired a shot. Admiral Tiang's fleet sat in its position outside Viridian's range for 6 days and then returned to standard patrol. The guns were never charged. The targeting systems were never activated. The fleet was simply there, the way a locked door is simply there, not doing anything, not needing to. The economic blockade never materialized. The formal sanctions that had been drafted and ready to issue disappeared from the Council's active proceedings without explanation. No announcement was made. No statement was released. The ultimatum simply stopped being a thing that was happening, the way a fire stops when the air runs out. Earth's 3 outer star systems remained Earth's. Nari read the final confirmation report on a Tuesday morning, sitting at her desk with a cup of tea going cold beside her keyboard. The report was 4 pages long and full of careful diplomatic language, but its meaning was simple. She read it once, set it down, and sat quietly for a while looking at the middle distance. Then she picked up the tea, found it cold, and went to make another cup. The messages came in over the weeks that followed, not through official channels, not at first. They came through secondary lines, private frequencies, routes that were technically approved but rarely used, the kind that said we are speaking but we are not officially speaking. 3 of them were from smaller civilizations whose names had appeared on Junho's list. The Sorvan Collective was among them. The messages were careful and formal and said very little directly, but what they said between the lines was this: we noticed what happened. We would like to talk, not through the council, directly. Wujin managed the incoming traffic with the same unhurried efficiency he applied to everything. He sorted, filtered, verified, and passed the relevant material to Yuna, who summarized it for Junho, who read the summaries and wrote responses that were short and warm and said, essentially, we are listening. Come and talk. 2 of those civilizations opened formal bilateral diplomatic channels with Earth within the next 3 months. One of them asked, quietly and with great care, whether Earth had any interest in discussing mutual defense arrangements. Junho wrote that response himself. It was 1 paragraph long. The answer was yes. 6 months after Viridian, Harry was assigned as Earth's new permanent envoy to the station. She had not asked for it. Nari had simply called her in one afternoon and told her, in the same calm and certain voice she used for everything, that the posting was hers if she wanted it. Harry had said yes before she fully understood she was going to. On her first morning, she walked into the council chamber alone. A Veth protocol officer met her at the entrance and walked her through the chamber, pointing out the designated area for Earth's permanent envoy. A seat in the observer rows mid-tier with a clear sight line to the grand tier. Respectable, appropriate for Earth standing, properly positioned. Harry looked at the seat. She looked at the center of the floor. She looked at the small faint ring etched into the stone where junior delegations were supposed to stand. She walked past all of it and took a position near the center of the open floor, slightly to the left of where Junho had stood, and set her bag down beside her foot. The protocol officer stopped walking. It looked at her. Then it looked at the spot she was standing in. Then it looked at her again with the expression of something encountering a pattern it had recently been forced to update its understanding of. Harry met its eyes pleasantly and said nothing. After a moment, the officer turned and walked away. From a seat in the far observer rose the Sorvan representative, the same one who had paused to look at Junho on the way out 6 months ago, watched the young human woman stand in the center of the chamber floor with her bag at her feet and her chin level, and it made a small quiet sound that, across the vast difference between their biologies, translated roughly as yes. There it is, same as before. Junho was back on Earth, at his desk doing paperwork. There was a great deal of it. The administrative aftermath of what had happened at Viridian was, in practical terms, an enormous amount of documentation, communication logs, formal response filings, fleet movement records, the bilateral channel openings, the defense discussion correspondence. It piled up steadily and he worked through it steadily, the same way he did everything, without hurry and without complaint. Nari stopped by his office on a Wednesday afternoon. She leaned in the doorway and looked at the stacks of paper on his desk and the half-full cup of tea beside his keyboard and the man sitting behind it all, reading a document with the same expression he wore in the council chamber. Open, neutral, completely present. "They are calling you the Still One," she said, "in 17 languages. Apparently it translates differently in each one, but they all mean roughly the same thing." Junho looked up. "Did we get reimbursed for the protein bar?" he said. Nari looked at him. Then she laughed. It came out of her fully and without warning, the kind of laugh that only arrives after a very long period of not laughing, and it filled the small office and spilled out into the corridor beyond the door. She laughed until her eyes were wet, and then she straightened up and wiped her face and shook her head. Junho watched her with a small, quiet smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "I will look into it," Nari said finally. She left him to his paperwork. Outside the window, the city moved through its afternoon, streets full, lights on. A billion ordinary lives running their ordinary courses. People buying food and arguing about small things and going home and making plans for tomorrow. Living their lives without knowing, and without needing to know, that 6 months ago one quiet man had stood in a room between the stars and refused to move, and that all of this, all the noise and light and ordinary beautiful mess of it, had continued because of that. Junho picked up his pen. He went back to the paperwork. The city hummed outside the window, and the 3 star systems at the edge of human space held their orbits undisturbed. And somewhere on Viridian Station, a young woman stood in the center of a great chamber floor and did not bow. And the galaxy, slowly and without any formal announcement, began to understand what kind of thing humanity actually was. Not a threat. Not an aggressor. Just something that had survived everything the universe had thrown at it, and had decided, quietly and completely, that it was done being surprised by the next thing.